All right, let's dive right in. Today we're unpacking India's latest economic survey. Now think of this as the country's official annual report card, and believe me, this year's edition tells a really fascinating story about where India is headed. So right from the get-go, the survey sets up this powerful contrast. And what's interesting is, it's not just throwing numbers at you. No, it's carefully framing a very specific narrative, a tale of two economies really, setting the stage for India's economic story in what is, let's be honest, a pretty turbulent world. And here it is, laid out plain and simple. On one side, you've got this picture of India, resilient, full of momentum. And on the other, a global economy that's looking, well, pretty fragile and uncertain. The whole theme of the survey really boils down to this one idea, a bright spot in a world that's facing some serious shadows. So, all this confidence, it's really captured in one big number, 7%. That's the new medium-term growth projection, and it's an upgrade from 6.5%. This basically cements India's spot as the fastest-growing major economy for the fourth year in a row. Now, why does a number like this matter so much? Well, because sustained high growth is the engine that creates jobs, pulls people out of poverty, and pays for everything a country needs to develop. So, you see, this isn't just a forecast, it's a huge statement of intent.
Okay, so that brings us to the big question, right? What's actually powering this growth engine? I mean, how is India keeping this momentum going when the rest of the world seems to be hitting one roadblock after another? Let's take a look under the hood.
And this dashboard gives us a fantastic snapshot of the economy's health. You've got two really crucial things happening at once. First, you see that strong GDP growth, forecasted at 7.4%. But at the same time, look at the fiscal deficit. It's actually going down. Getting that combination right, high growth and better fiscal discipline, that's a huge theme running through this entire survey.
Now, the survey is really clear on this point. This isn't just some temporary sugar rush from people spending more. No, this growth is being driven by some really deep fundamental changes on the supply side. What does that mean? Well, we're talking about a massive government push in investment, big reforms that are kicking manufacturing into high gear, and these huge productivity boosts we're getting from all the new infrastructure and digital platforms. It's about building a stronger foundation. And when we say massive investment, we mean it. The scale is just staggering. The government's capital spending is set to be over 11 lakh crore. To put that in perspective, that's more than 4 times what it was back in 2018. That's a serious amount of fuel being poured directly into the country's infrastructure engine. But you might be wondering, how are they paying for all this? And that's the other side of the coin. This huge spending spree isn't happening in a vacuum. It's actually being backed by much stronger public finances. Just look at the trends. Government revenue's up, GST collections are really solid, and the number of people filing direct taxes has ballooned to over 90 million. So the strategy is pretty simple, really. Spend big by earning more.
Okay, one area that's a real standout is manufacturing. You can see it right here in the gross value added, or GVA, which is basically just a way to measure the sector's output. It's accelerating, and the survey calls this a structural recovery, not just a blip. A big reason for this is something called the Production-Linked Incentive, or PLI schemes. The idea is simple. The government rewards companies for making more stuff in India. And it's working. These schemes have already pulled in massive investments and created more than 1.2 million jobs.
So the domestic story is strong, but what about how India connects with the rest of the world? Well, that's looking remarkably resilient too. I mean, think about it. Despite all the global trade drama, India's total exports actually hit a record high. Plus, it's still the world's #1 destination for remittances. We're talking over $135 billion flowing in. These are absolutely crucial shock absorbers in a bumpy global economy.
But listen, the survey is definitely not just a victory lap. Not at all. It's also a very sober, clear-eyed look at the very real dangers that are out there. In fact, it spends a lot of time on the risks and the tough policy calls that are going to have to be made.
And check this out. For the first time ever, the survey actually maps out 3 different possible global scenarios. But here's the kicker. Look at those probabilities. The stress case, the one with financial system stress and more geopolitical drama, is seen as just as likely as the best case. That's a 40 to 45% chance. The message here is loud and clear for policymakers. You've got to think in terms of probabilities and prepare for the worst, not just hope for the best.
Now, turning inwards, the survey doesn't pull any punches on domestic policy either. It offers a pretty strong and direct critique, which is perfectly summed up in this one powerful line. This is really a call for a much more strategic way of thinking about social support. It's all about finding the right balance. And this gets right to the heart of a really critical debate around cash transfers. The survey is totally upfront that, yes, they provide an absolutely essential safety net and immediate help. But, and this is a big but, it also warns that just expanding them rapidly without conditions could backfire. How? Well, it could end up crowding out the money needed for long-term investments, like in infrastructure, and put a strain on state finances. So it's this classic policy puzzle. How do you balance immediate help with long-term sustainable growth?
Now for some good news, especially on the jobs front. The data here shows a really positive trend. The overall unemployment rate has kept on falling. And just as important, if not more so, is that the labor force participation rate is on the rise. We're seeing more people, especially women, entering or returning to the workforce, which is a great sign of a more inclusive economic expansion.
But, of course, it's not all simple. The survey definitely doesn't shy away from the tricky parts of the modern job market. Take the gig economy. It's seen as a huge source of new opportunities and flexibility, which is great. But on the other side of that coin, it also flags some serious new risks. Things like unstable income, no social security net, and very little bargaining power for workers. So the push is to come up with new rules for this new world of work.
And this whole theme of a balancing act? It's captured perfectly by a metaphor the survey uses for financial regulation. It calls it a tightrope walk. And that's exactly what it is, isn't it? The big challenge is staying open to all the global money you need to fuel growth, while at the same time you've got to protect your economy from the sudden shocks and volatility that same money can bring. It's a real high-wire act.
All right, so let's get to the final section. How does all of this, the growth, the risks, the delicate policy balancing, how does it all come together into a long-term game plan for India? A huge piece of that game plan is exports. The survey basically argues that in today's world of messy, fragmented trade, the old way of doing things just won't cut it. The shift needs to be fundamental. It's about moving up the ladder, from making low-value stuff to creating high-value exports. It's about competing on how good you are, on your capabilities and quality, not just on being the cheapest. And this all fits into a broader philosophy that the survey has a really interesting name for: disciplined Swadeshi. Now, this isn't about closing the doors to the world. Far from it. It's a very calculated three-part strategy. First, build up your own strength in key strategic sectors. Second, make it cheaper to do business across the board. And the ultimate goal? To make India so deeply embedded, so indispensable in global supply chains, that the world stops thinking about buying from India and just buys from India. It becomes the default choice. So when you step back and look at the whole thing, you realize this economic survey is more than just a list of policies. It's really laying out a whole philosophy of how to govern. It's all about choosing balance over extremes, taking the time to plan carefully instead of looking for shortcuts, and focusing on building long-term capability and credibility, even if it's not always the easy or popular thing to do. And that leaves us with one final big thought to chew on. What the survey lays out is a remarkably confident story, a story of growth that's being driven from within. But, and it's a huge but, its ultimate success really all depends on being able to navigate this incredibly uncertain and fractured world we live in. The bet India is making on itself is crystal clear. The real question, the one we'll all be watching, is how that bet will ultimately reshape its place on the global stage.